BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a new report says more money and a sense of urgency is needed if TB in cattle is to be eradicated in England. We'll have more on that later. And apologies for the background noise. As you can probably hear, it has just started to pour with rain. First this morning, major changes are needed to rebuild trust in the body responsible for promoting Welsh meat. That's according to an inquiry by Senedd members. The report by the Welsh Parliament's Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee calls for decisive action following what's described as internal turmoil and leadership challenges at Meat Promotion Wales. Among the recommendations are a full review of ownership, stronger industry representation and clearer targets. BBC Wales Environment correspondent Stephen Messenger reports.
Welsh farmers pay a levy on the cattle, sheep and pigs they sell, which goes to fund Hybci Cymru or Meat Promotion Wales. Owned and overseen by the Welsh Government but operating at arm's length, its job is to market and develop the country's red meat sector. But in recent years it's been beset by problems, summarised in this week's report as including an internal investigation into accusations of bullying, the departure of its former chief executive under a cloud and a staff exodus. The Senedd's Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee is now calling for major reforms, including a full review of the organisation's structure and the introduction of measurable targets on performance and accountability. Conservative Andrew R.T. Davies is the committee's chair.
One of the key recommendations we make is around ownership, whether it is fit and proper that the government continue to own it or the levy payers themselves own it, because obviously they're the ones paying the bills. Governance needs to be strengthened, the ownership question needs to be addressed, and above all, key targets need to be set so that promotional activity can deliver returns back to the farm gate.
Farming unions welcomed the committee's findings, saying they validated long-standing calls from the industry and highlighted the importance of having an effective red meat levy board in Wales. Meat Promotion Wales thanked the committee for what it described as timely recommendations as the organisation works to finalise a future delivery plan for 2026 and beyond. The Welsh Government said it was reviewing the committee's report and would respond in due course.
Stephen Messenger reporting there. There should be more urgency and a bigger budget to tackle TB in cattle in England, while farmers should be empowered to do more to eradicate the disease. Those are the headlines from a new report published today, which also calls for a bovine TB tzar to coordinate government policy, along with investment in IT systems, vaccination and testing. Bovine TB costs taxpayers in England £100 million a year and farmers about £75 million. As we've reported on this programme over many years, there has been a debate about the spread of the disease from badgers to cattle and vice versa. A controversial cull of badgers was introduced by the Conservative government in 2013. The current Labour government has pledged to end culling by the end of this Parliament. Well, that decision has been welcomed by wildlife groups but criticised by some who say that the alternatives, large-scale vaccination of badgers and cattle, aren't yet ready. Today's report comes from the same panel of experts, led by Professor Sir Charles Godfray, who looked into the disease in 2018. The government asked them to look again to consider any new evidence. Successive governments have supported the TB eradication plan for England, which was launched in 2014 and aims for the country to be free of bovine TB by 2038. I asked Sir Charles if that was realistic.
It is realistic, but it is challenging. I think what we are saying in the report published today is that to get there requires much more attention to be directed at it than it currently is at the moment. So we're really calling for a focus on reaching that target.
You also want more money. What for?
I should say we are not naive about the pressures on government finance at the moment. So we're saying, yes, there does need to be investment, but we also echo a recent report by the National Audit Office, which recommended that DEFRA looks at its investment, not only in bovine TB, but in other livestock diseases, and looks critically at where investment now can save money in the medium and long term. The money's needed for a variety of things. It's needed for for example, for the IT infrastructure that would be required for a vaccination program, or in fact for any other intervention. It's required for non-lethal control of the disease in the wildlife reservoir. For example, how can we actually invest in badger vaccination so that it can be logistically and financially viable at scale?
I think the one word that everybody involved in this discussion can agree on is that it is challenging. Even assuming that there is more money put into developing both a cattle and a badger vaccination programme, when might they realistically be ready to go?
It is still unclear because there are some hurdles that have to be overcome, some technical hurdles. So I can't give you a straight answer to that. One thing we do talk about is we want to avoid lazy parallels between bovine TB as a disease and the pandemic. But what we did learn from the pandemic is that when there is a concerted focus on a particular problem, on a particular disease, then things can move much faster than they do during a normal time. And I guess what we're calling is for some of that lessons from the pandemic to be applied here.
Given all those complications, and that you say that the badger culls have made some positive contribution, is it sensible to end them by the end of this Parliament 2029?
So that really is a political decision. It's not a straight science decision. It's a political decision because it involves ministers to weigh the strongly held views of different stakeholders, and also there's an economic component to it. So our job was to try and clarify the evidence that goes into that difficult decision. It's unavoidably a decision that has to be made at the political level rather than at a purely technocratic level.
We've spoken before about this issue over the years, and as this report points out, it is very contentious with people with strong beliefs and strong opinions on all sides. You talk about needing a willingness to move beyond long-held positions by government, the industry and wildlife NGOs. How confident are you that that can happen?
Well, I really don't know, Charlotte, but I hope it can happen. I think that it needs to happen if we hope to reach the target. And of course, its benefits not only for the farmers and for the livestock industry, but also for wildlife. The badgers suffering from TB is a animal welfare issue for the wild animal as well. So I think that there is often a commonality of interest there that sometimes gets missed in some of the controversies over exactly the role of the wildlife reservoir.
Sir Charles Godfray from the Oxford Martin School at Oxford University. In a statement, the Farming Minister, Daniel Zeichner, said that following a record year for badger vaccinations, the new badger vaccination field force will be deployed next year. He said the government will consider the report's findings and that early next year a comprehensive strategy will set out how we will eradicate this disease by 2038. Mr Zeichner adds, "We know this will be challenging." So can those with strong opinions on this issue work together, as Sir Charles suggests? I spoke to different sides of the debate, starting with Nigel Palmer, Chief Executive of the Badger Trust, who told me the report is disappointing.
Badger vaccination has some benefits, but it's not going to solve the problem, which is bovine TB in cattle. Vaccinating cattle is, we believe, the solution to the problem, but there's still a lot going on within that it's some way away.
Well, Sir Charles Godfray, who chaired this panel, says we need a step change in urgency and resources on this issue. Now, they are clear that there is a link between badgers spreading this disease into cattle, and they say that you need to understand that so that you can decide where to vaccinate, how to vaccinate, even if you've ruled out, as this government has, culling.
Yes, and I would agree, but I would also counter that we believe that it is endemic within the herd and that the testing is not finding it. Therefore, if you use the better testing, you would find it.
I just want to talk about badger vaccination. How confident are you that that can now be scaled up?
So I think it's an incredibly complex thing to do. There is some value in it. It's not going to get to the heart of the problem and where the disease lies, which is why I would say we would be better off investing in vaccinating the cattle.
There are a lot of entrenched positions in this debate and have been over the years. Sir Charles Godfray talks about everybody working together. Can that happen?
We don't need politics in this situation. We need solutions. And I have every confidence that between the farming community, the wildlife community, and the government being proactive, that this would be resolved, and that would be better for all of us.
Nigel Palmer from the Badger Trust. The National Farmers Union is opposed to ending the badger culls, which are paid for and run by farmers, and which, it argues, have helped reduce TB in cattle. Its president is Tom Bradshaw.
Well, we've always believed that the science and the evidence is really important when arriving at a TB strategy, and we are concerned that within the report they refer to the decision that's been made by ministers to end the wildlife control programme, when we were hoping that this would be an independent review of the science and evidence that's come forward.
The report does acknowledge that badgers play a part in infecting cattle, but it also points out that most transmission is cattle to cattle. And they're clear that culls are now over and the government's looking at other solutions.
And if we knew that we had the solutions at hand that were definitely going to be able to deliver the eradication strategy by 2038, then we would be supportive of that. We recognise that farmers have a clear role to play in how they manage the cattle within their herds, but we also have to recognise that in other countries where they've been able to eradicate this disease, the wildlife reservoir has been tackled. So a use of all of the tools in the toolbox is essential as we continue to try and eradicate this disastrous disease, which is having such a huge impact on the mental toll of farmers right the way across England and Wales.
And that's something that this report does acknowledge, but it says that with more money and more urgency, that target of eradication by 2038 can still be met.
And we would say that at the moment the strategy is floundering. For the last 2 years, there hasn't been any clear direction. We desperately need the cattle vaccine to come forwards. They say in the report it may be deployable in Q1 of 2029. But at the moment, we still don't have a DIVA test which can differentiate between whether an animal has been vaccinated or whether it's been exposed to the disease. And it's absolutely fundamental that we can distinguish between the two so that it doesn't impact our international trade. And there's a long way to go, and we do need the urgency, we need the investment, we need government to step up to the plate and really try and deliver this eradication strategy.
But as this report points out, it's very difficult to isolate the impact of the culls from all the other measures that were taking place at the same time. And it points out there is still more that farmers need to be doing on biosecurity. So it's surely unfair to expect taxpayers to foot this bill if the farmers aren't doing enough to protect their own businesses.
Well, taxpayers didn't foot the bill of the wildlife control programme. Farmers have paid for that.
No, but they do pay £100 million every year for TB, don't they?
That's because it's a notifiable disease which needs to be eradicated because of the risk of transmission to humans. So we have to recognise why we're trying to eradicate this disease. Farmers have a very important role to play, but so does the science that sits behind eradicating this disease. We mustn't lose access to international trade by trying to move forward too quickly with a vaccine which hasn't got international accreditation. And we will do our part. The farming industry wants to use the enhanced testing, which is talked about within the report, but at the moment can't be done within the legislation. So we need changes there. We need to improve the biosecurity, but we also need government to recognise that where it is endemic within the wildlife population and can be linked to a cattle breakdown, then we must be able to control the wildlife in that area.
National Farmers Union President Tom Bradshaw. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.